Okay. Color Excel. Hamasek.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. This is the ARPA Institute monthly event, and ARPA Institute is thankful that you all can join us this Saturday. A few words about what ARPA is and what ARPA does. ARPA Institute has been working for 30 years in Armenia. Our main objective is to provide technical and expert assistance to Armenia. We work with the universities and the Academy of Sciences, several various institutes, as well as the government of Armenia. And we provide both technical expertise and also sometimes instrumentation that is necessary for scientific research and advancement. We have several different programs. Our annual Invention Competition for young scientists is open to all scientists 30 years and below, and also, of course, graduate students. And we've been doing it for 13 years. This is the 14th year. And any scientist who has an invention can join, can present their invention, and we will select the best invention and give an award. We also have working with the Alekhanyan National Lab. We are trying to create now the first Class 1000 clean room for scientific research in Armenia. We also provide, of course, as I said, instrumentation and technical advice to the Alekhanyan National Lab. And also we have provided several different instruments, including a sequencer to the Molecular Biology Institute, and also technical expertise. And also we work with the Physical Research Institute in Ashtarag, Chemical Physics Institute, and several other institutions, as well as the universities, both the Yerevan State University and the Polytechnic University. In Los Angeles, the only objective we have is to provide information regarding Armenia and Armenians in general. We're happy to have today experts in the digital area that will present activities in Armenia and also what is going on and what is expected to go on related to new developments in the high-tech industry. I will introduce our moderator today, and he will take over and introduce the speakers. Our moderator is Armen Kharlopian. He is a PhD in data science, and he's a startup investor. His industry experience is very wide. He's a scientific advisory board member at the NASA-backed Trickle organization, and he's a founding member at the Badge Accelerator. He's an investor, and he and Emma Arakelyan and several others are trying to create unicorns in Armenia, which is an organization or a company that will be worth at least $1 billion. And that is a very important activity that Armen and his team are doing. So without further ado, Armen, take it over.
Thank you very much, Hagop, and a warm welcome to everyone live in the Zoom today, watching the live stream on Facebook, and we'll be watching this recording in posterity. Very excited about our panel session today, and we'll be taking points of view, both top down in terms of what's happening across industry in Armenia, specifically around digitization, as well as bottom up specific examples vis-a-vis the startup motion. Warm regards, currently hosting this moderation in the UAE as per Expo 2020. And by example, We have Estonia did its fantastic marketing of e-Estonia, very much as per the theme here of our panel. So with this, I am delighted to introduce first Rafi Kasarjan. Rafi has a bachelor's and MBA from Stanford University. He is the CEO and principal advisor of Sensian, a boutique advisory firm focused on the Armenian technology sector, and most recently had a fantastic DigiWeek set of activities, Digitech and the corresponding sessions and adjoining conferences. Previously in his experience, he was VP and General Manager at Fair Isaac Corp. And I personally follow quite closely his publications in the EVN report. So with that, Rafi, a warm welcome to you. And we'll introduce, we also have a fellow panelist on the line, Ashot Vardanyan. Ashot is an entrepreneur with his company Unum. His study is in astrophysics and is an avid traveler. Specifically, after visiting 4 continents, he has made both his home Armenia as well as that for his company. So with this, as per our structure in ARPA fashion and style, Rafi will defer the floor to you first for 10 minutes of prepared commentary. Next to you, Ashot. We'll conduct Q&A and then open it up for broader Q&A from the audience. So without further ado, Rafi, please, a warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Armin, and thank you, Hagop, for having invited me again to be part of this very important series. I mean, ARPA does great work, and the quality of the conversations in many of these have been fantastic. I also want to say hello to many people that I recognize here in the on our guest list viewing today. Lots of familiar names, so I hope to see you all in Armenia soon. So, this is a pretty broad topic, right? So let's thinking about digitization and the future of Armenia. And I think the best way to start is to provide a little bit of historical context to see how things have shifted, and also as an indicator of where we're likely to go and where we see opportunities and where we see challenges. If we think about post-Soviet or independent era Armenia, I think there are really sort of 3 main phases in terms of the technology industry here. So right after the breakup of the Soviet Union, you had kind of the negative impact of brain drain that actually occurred not only in Armenia, but Russia and many of the other former Soviet republics, as people that had very strong research credentials were basically snapped up by various companies and research labs around the world. But at the same time, you also had a series of investments that happened in the 90s to take advantage of some of the very serious work that had happened in Armenia during the previous 50 years. In particular, in the area of electronic design automation, which is basically chip design. This was an area that was where Armenia and Armenian scientists were an integral part of the development that was being done throughout the Soviet Union. We hear numbers about 30% of military, computer research being done in Armenia. Many of the supercomputers that were doing guidance systems and other things were developed here in Armenia, and that led to first some startups that were established post-Soviet era. And then a series of investments and acquisitions. So companies like Ponte Solutions, Epigee Labs, and a number of others turned into Synopsys, Mentor Graphics, Virage Logic, and they really drove kind of the first wave of significant technology development post-Soviet era in Armenia. So that was started in kind of the early to mid 90s and still goes on strongly today. Obviously, Synopsys is probably one of the largest tech employers in Armenia. Mentor Graphics, which is now part of Siemens, also very large, and a number of smaller ones as well. The second wave happened throughout the 2000s, and this was more of a traditional path that many countries followed, which is that there were a bunch of very smart people coming out of universities. They were looking for things to do. And so either through organized offshoring or outsourcing companies, or people doing a lot of freelance work, there was a lot of sort of what I would call lower level development being done in Armenia. So things like, web design, designing all kinds of sort of custom applications for a variety of industries, usually based on requirements that were defined by customers, in Europe or North America or Russia or other places. So it's kind of your typical kind of offshoring market or industry. And then probably around 2010 or so, maybe a little bit earlier for some of the companies, you started to see some of these companies that had gone through the offshoring and gained expertise, not only in just sort of technologies to be used, but also understanding different markets and different market opportunities, started to productize some of what they had learned. So, a very early example of that, and probably the most successful serial entrepreneur in Armenia, is Hovhannes Avoyan. He had started with a team working for Lycos, which is one of the early browsers or early search engines, and then was able to leverage that team to do a number of custom projects, including something in the area of server monitoring, which he then turned into a startup called Monetis that was actually fairly successful in that field. And then obviously he went on to found Picsart, which, as we know, is one of the unicorns that was mentioned earlier. And but Hovhannes was really kind of on his own, I would say, until probably about 5 to maximum 7 years ago. And then what we started to see was the beginning of the third wave, which is serious product companies that were either fully formed and created and launched in Armenia, or were launched by Armenians that originally from Armenia that had gone abroad, started something, came back, and then developed it, and grew it here. And the fundamental difference between this third phase and the second phase is that these companies were creating real product value, real service value in the areas that were truly globally competitive. So this is no longer about making an app for a local market, or even something that could succeed in sort of adjacent markets. But when we now talk about these companies, the known unicorns as well as unicorns to be, they are globally competitive companies that happen to be headquartered in Armenia. And what this has brought is that we now have the first generation of companies, companies like Picsart, and then later on Crisp and Podcastle, and then the newest wave companies like Sila and Cognaze, Ashot's company Unum. They sort of showed a path to younger engineers, and also people that were not just engineers but had some experience on the product management or business side, that you could develop globally competitive products in Armenia. And the best indications of how things are going is that you now have people that were at Picsart for several years left to found their own startup. Now, as we know, the startup world is a very risky world. The chances of success are fairly small. But what we do have are this sort of next generation of entrepreneurs and founders that have gone through one cycle of sort of hypergrowth, seen the mistakes that were made, seen what opportunities look like, and are now willing to go on their own. And what's really important about this jump from the second wave to the third wave is that initially, sort of the highest thing you could achieve as a programmer in Armenia would be to get a very good position at Synopsys or Mentor Graphics and kind of grow through that, very in a corporate world where you've got defined career paths, steady salary, good benefits, things like that, to people saying, I'm going to keep my day job at a company like Synopsys, but I'm going to freelance at night, to ultimately saying, no, if I really want to succeed, I can't just be working on a startup between 7 p.m. and 2 a.m. And we're willing to jump ship and look for seed money, and then eventually raise additional rounds to actually launch their own startups. And this is a very, very important evolution that is critical for the further development of industry here. And as part of that, we are seeing people becoming more confident, obviously. And the other thing we're seeing more investment coming into Armenian companies as a result. So whereas 5 or 7 years ago, if you were a startup in Armenia, the best you could hope for was to win maybe one of the local kind of business plan or startup competitions, get $10,000 or $20,000 or $30,000 to get you started for a few months. Then you would go to one of the local venture capital firms. For a long time, Granadis Ventures was the only one, and then we had SmartGate and others joined as well. Now we have a host of venture funds that are run by Armenians or run out of Armenia. But because some of the more successful startups were able to attract Silicon Valley type or Sand Hill Road type venture funding, it kind of put Armenia on the map. So that whereas before, if you were an Armenian entrepreneur, you went to pitch to 15 VCs in the US, and when you'd say Armenia, they'd say, "What do you mean Albania? Do you mean Romania?" Now with Service Titan, Picsart, Crisp, and a number of others, venture capitalists sort of understand that even though Armenia is this tiny country in a part of the world that not everybody knows very well on the map, there's a proven track record, and we're sort of boxing above our weight in terms of what we do in technology and startups. So all of that, I think, are positive trends, and again, you sort of create this ecosystem that will perpetuate itself and grow. And so that's kind of the positive side. I do want to say a couple things about some of the challenges that we face and that we continue to face. First of all, because of the success, not just of the startups, but also more established companies or people coming to open offices in Armenia, whether through acquisition or because as a result of building teams here, you've got this incredibly strong demand for resources, and our ability to develop resources, the supply of resources, is nowhere near demand. So, I mean, there are a lot of numbers being thrown around between 3,000 to 5,000 to 10,000, sort of open positions that could be filled if we had the necessary skilled resources. And the constraint is mostly at the senior developer level. So somebody that has 3 to 5 years of development experience can start to lead others, and knows things about architecture and how to develop products. So all of this has caused things like salary hyperinflation. So there's a real salary bubble going on right now where people can literally jump from company to company and add 20, 30, 40% to their salary just because the next company is willing to pay more and has a huge need. That is not sustainable and will burst at some point. The other and part of the reason we have this kind of mismatch between supply and demand is obviously that we're not graduating enough qualified people out of the traditional educational system, out of traditional universities, Yerevan State Polytechnic, Slavonic, AUA. Combined, the number of graduates that are coming out of their STEM programs aren't enough to match the demand coming out of industry. So we've had a number of sort of alternative tech education or STEM education programs have sprouted. Probably the most famous is Armenian Code Academy, but there's several ones. UAT, which is the organization, the Union of Advanced Technology Enterprises, has for the last 7 or 8 years has launched and operates 600 RMAT engineering labs throughout public schools throughout the country in Armenia and Artsakh, as well as Jabakh. There are a number of other, Tumo has a program. There are a number of new ones that are coming, but all of these programs together combined still aren't enough to meet the demand that the industry is generating, which is actually kind of a good problem to have, right? Because before, the challenge was you had a bunch of smart people and they had nothing to do, or there was sort of no fulfilling employment for them. Now we have the reverse happening. Let me say a couple of words about the last 2 months and the influx of folks that we're seeing primarily from Russia, but also from Ukraine and Belarus as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The numbers go anywhere from 10,000 up to 50,000. A lot of the folks are young. A lot of them have worked for Western technology companies or freelance in technology. So we have this sort of big injection of resources that could help us meet some of that demand, and that's a great thing. And I have to say that until the war started, some of the local companies were now looking to either bring software engineers from other countries like India or some other countries in the Middle East, or we're even thinking about literally outsourcing to other countries. So imagine Armenia, which was kind of a destination for outsourcing, kind of turning around and saying, I need to find other places as fuel for the demand that I'm seeing in the marketplace. So as we look forward, I think this move towards productization is great and is likely to continue. I do think, and Ashok's going to talk about some sort of very deep tech that he and his team are working on, and they're part of a community of people that are working in different aspects of deep tech, whether that's artificial intelligence, high performance computing, or other kind of subsectors within technology. the great news is that we have people that understand sort of what is leading edge, or in some cases bleeding edge in these areas, and are starting to work on them. But what we don't have is the kind of the complete ecosystem, including strong research institutes, including strong universities, to be able to allow this ecosystem to grow. I think that we're in a much better place than we were 5 or 7 years ago, but we still have a long way to go. So I'll just stop there and hand it back over to Armen, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions later.
Thank you so much, Rafi, for that fantastic overview from the different waves we have had over the years to that of highlighting aspects in terms of institutional memory, strength. We'll definitely circle back in the QA, this whole key aspect in terms of the labor economics implications within country, across countries, and looking forward to that session. Ashot, handing the floor over to you also as professor of AI at AUA. Very exciting, as Rafi also called out, HPC, high performance computing, AI implications. Please, you have the floor.
Okay. Hey guys, thank you all for inviting. And it's a pleasure to be here. And I want to sign under like probably every word that Rafi just said. So he truly highlighted some of the big pain points I had, especially until the last 2 months, like the hyperinflated salaries, inability to find talents that meet your criteria, especially when you move to Armenia to do deep tech here, especially from places like Western US, or let's say Northeastern US, Moscow, Hong Kong, the places where talent is broad and accessible. Armenia seemed like really scarce in terms of resources. To continue this line of not having the ecosystem, it's just like so much broader than that. Like once you come here and you start doing this thing, and other founders tell you that they have to essentially import laptops into Armenia in their own backpacks just to stuff their own engineers because they don't want to go through the mess of going through customs. It sounds unbelievable at first, but once you go through it, you see like how painful the process is. And I feel like I definitely wouldn't be able to articulate from the high level so broadly like the whole history of how software was developing, especially here in Armenia, because I wasn't here. But at least the tiny part that I will try to add here is that I just so happened to like go through some of those stages from inside. So like growing up in Russia, I can see some of the pain points that we have here as a broader pain points of CIS countries. And in case of Russia, I saw how those were mitigated over the, let's say, the course of the last 10, 15 years or something like that. So I'm definitely sure that we're on a good trend. And this trend is further extended by what I would call the fourth wave of startups. So this is probably the only word I didn't like, that there were 3 waves. There's the 4th one. Yes, there's outsourcing, there's product companies, but then there's also deep tech, which I would generally isolate into something separate, even though obviously it's a spectrum. Like every company lands somewhere on this bar from, let's say, product to deep tech. I guess it makes sense to like slightly, at least shortly describe what we do. And for that, I guess it makes sense to share the screen. Would that be okay, guys? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Ashot. See if you can. If you're not enabled, Jora, please enable Ashot.
No, I gave capability already.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay, so the kind of the story is that I've been always doing programming. I'm about 26 now, and I don't remember myself without a keyboard in the hand. So I used to be a web developer doing this boring outsourcing stuff a very long time ago. And it was truly a way to meet like the ends. So once I had enough money to stop doing it, I started doing product stuff. And it was like the age of the mobile apps, the first generation of the App Store. And as soon as I got there and I did those apps for a few years, I got a bit bored by them. That's how I got into science. Luckily for me, I had an ability to like continue this line of research that I had previously, just amplified with the new mathematics that I learned in the university. So that's how I got myself into AI research. And when I say AI research, I mean not something specific for an application, like doing computer vision to, let's say, detect object on the camera and classify them if that's, let's say, a hot dog or not a hot dog. Or let's say you want to analyze text and classify the sentiment if it's positive or negative. Those are, in broad sense, applications. The part that I'm most interested is like the long-term vision of how AI can progress, how the signal propagation happens through neural networks, where's the limit to their ability to approximate continuous or maybe even potentially non-differentiable functions and stuff like that. So the problem that I faced there is that once you start doing that kind of stuff, you quickly realize that to scale your experiment, you need far more resources than what you currently have. And what has been happening in AI in the last 5 years, it's not democratization, it's actually the opposite. Most of the modern AI papers are published by huge teams. And there's like a trend line that shows how impressive papers were published 10 years ago with just 1 or 2 authors. And now we have teams of 50 people, so many names that they don't even fit on the first page of the white paper. And the same happens in the size of the neural networks, the size of the data sets, and the amount of money and the amount of compute that is needed to get us to the state of the art. So being limited by our resources, in terms of our resources, we had to go a different path, innovating across the layers of abstractions, not just designing the modeling part that's what's generally called AI stuff, but we also had to re-implement a lot of the infrastructure. So to put into like the programming languages perspective, most of the modeling happens in Python. But then as Bjarne Strostrup, the designer of the C++ language who retired yesterday, has said, C++ is the hidden engine of everything. Like C++, assembly, a lot of high performance computing is needed to actually power all this modeling, all this analytics. And no matter where you are, if it's Amazon or Alibaba, or maybe it's Burbank, no matter what kind of pipeline you're using, you still need a lot of low-level programming and understanding of the hardware to actually be able to scale your analytics, regardless of what kind of application you are trying to build. And the problem that I faced there is that, as you can see on my screen, this is like a page from our corporate blog, which is hardly a corporate blog, more like a technical blog with a lot of fun technical ideas. So you fellow scientists should probably enjoy it. One of the articles here is very basic on the bottlenecks that exist in model computing. And this is the realm where most programmers live. So this is the kind of processing that's accessible to everyone. We use computers' random access memory with a bandwidth of, let's say, 100 gigabyte per second. And if the data set that we work with fits into this volume, it's all good and shiny. We don't have to work hard. If we want to have higher bandwidth of processing, we need to be able to program things such as GPUs. And this is highly non-trivial. Even though it's been around for almost 15 years now, the general purpose GPU programming with OpenCL and CUDA, like hardly any modern package scales properly on those GPUs. But then the big problem is that their memory limit is even smaller than that is accessible to the CPU. Once we get to the big data layer, we have a lot more storage, a lot of more memory, but we are not able to work with it fast enough. So going from, let's say, 100 gigabyte per second or terabyte per second bandwidth to something like 4 gigabytes per second, or more realistically, let's say 40, 50 megabytes per second is what every single company has to deal with, even though they not always like understand the underlying bottlenecks, which part of the pipeline is causing this hurdle. What does it mean for us as a company or as a, let's say, a private lab? So in the past 6 years that I've been building Unum, I've been investing into all of our research myself. So we had the flexibility to do whatever we want to do. The good part is that even if we try to monetize one of the things that we've built internally, the market for it and the demand is so outstanding that the investment acquired by some of our direct competitors for this product alone in last year alone is bigger than all of their accumulated investment in the previous 10 years. So this database management software market is about $100 billion today and will be $150 billion in a few years. It's solving exactly that bottleneck that I'm describing to you, that if you want to work with more data, the bandwidth at which you can access this data is very small. It's like describing the difference between the short-term memory of a human and his long-term memory. It's very easy for us to operate on, let's say, a set of 3 or 4 digits. But when we start remembering names of people we've met, let's say 10 years ago, it becomes very slow and complicated. So database companies are trying to solve it. And there's this modern gold rush that's happening across the data processing stack. A lot more money than modern startups can swallow. So I guess Kung Fu Panda image is not too childish here. So the good part is that many of those companies are not startups. So it's a known field, and if someone tries to innovate here, they kind of understand the overall model. So this is one of those things that kind of separates infrastructure and deep tech companies from the product companies. In the product companies, you often have to innovate in your business model, in your, let's say, corporate structure, in your product offering. With infrastructure and deep tech companies, it's often not the case. You want to be as similar in terms of the interface as possible to the previous companies, and you just have to optimize some very specific metrics. You don't have to design a very new interface or convince others that it is better than the others. So there are those 3 companies that I like to use as reference points. MongoDB, Elasticsearch, and Snowflake. All of them became public in the last 5 years. And luckily, I was a pre-IPO investor in all 3 of them. So MongoDB went public first out of this batch in 2017. And now, or let's say last year, they were worth about $35 billion. Soon after them, Elasticsearch continued that path. And then there was Snowflake. The last, but definitely not the least, at one point last year, their cap was at $120 billion. For reference, it's about 30 times the government budget of Armenia. So having a company like this in Armenia will not just mean that we can fund the future of research in my own lab that I've been funding myself the last 2 years for the next 34 years, or let's say fund another dozen of companies. It's actually more than enough money to rebuild an entire country from my perspective. So because this market is so lucrative and the bandwidth difference between how fast you can process small data and big data is so big, many companies actually try to fill this void, actually make the bigger data accessible at similar speeds. And we are not the only ones there. So this is a short, non-inclusive list of companies that compete as private companies right now. Databricks, the first in the pack, already valued at $38 billion after just private rounds. So it's not even a public company. Again, 10 times bigger than the government budget of Armenia. And then there's CockroachDB, Neo4j, ClickHouse, Yugabyte, Redis, and many others. Too many to name. Some of them have raised $2.6 billion in 1 year alone, and that's just for a single company. So for us, it means that once we design infrastructure that competes in those very obvious metrics with our competitors, we can actually go to the market with a product that is very understandable. So even though we're a lab and we work on deep tech stuff, so we do theoretical computer science research, we design new algorithms. It's kind of the forgotten art of programming, like the stuff that people used to do in 80s and 70s when the computers were new. But then they kind of like lost fun in it, so they stopped innovating in the algorithms. We try to continue this spirit, and we also have to innovate a lot in like the high performance implementations. Thanks to the past years of work, we've got to this result when our solutions are better, by far the best compared to any infrastructure anyone can find anywhere on the planet, including the infrastructure used by Google and Facebook, and including the infrastructure that's being sold by our competitors to the others. And we kind of show it through a very long list of boring technical articles. This one, for reference, is 5,300 words. So I'm definitely not going to overwhelm you with this data. but I want to show you the broader picture. So, okay, we're deep tech, but what the heck is that whole thing? Unfortunately, like there's not a single direct answer. I would describe deep tech as companies that mostly try to invest into R&D. So the product companies often compete in terms of like the minor features within their product. And it's very relevant for them to find the right market because the market isn't obvious. That's why it takes a lot of iteration in terms of the marketing, and it leads to really inflated marketing budgets. So even within our competitors, even accounting for the fact that we consider ourselves a deep tech company, my competitors are not profitable companies, even the public ones. They lose a lot of money every year because not being able to compete with each other in terms of tech, they need to compete in terms of their power of acquiring the clients. This leads to all this VC money being accumulated by startups and then funneled into, let's say, Google's search advertising or Facebook advertising or more expensive, like even more expensive corporate sales. With deep tech, even though it sounds complicated and like too sciencey, everything actually looks very similar to normal tech. So there's this set of presentations by Dealroom that I often quote and share, which show how the path of a company differs depending on which route it chooses. So both deep tech and classical tech kind of have similar traction in terms of the speed, the frequency, and the size of rounds that they raise. They also have relatively similar graduation rates between those rounds. So biotech is like a different story. They are closer to deep tech than tech, obviously, and they are much harder to enter. They are not that digital. They are much harder to scale. But in terms of comparing the classical deep tech and tech, they are very similar, and you shouldn't be afraid to jump into those. And I'm lucky to be stating that Armenia is actually home to not just one deep tech startup, but a few. And many of them are led by former scientists or current scientists actually trying to build up small research teams, both publicly and privately funded. And as they get to the stage when they're more or less certain in terms of the specs of their product, they can actually start marketing it. So in this regard, Armenia has some historical benefits, proudly saying that, yes, I've seen all those mentioned, like how many PhDs we had in the Soviet times, how much money was funneled into our military budgets and from military budgets into research budgets. But to be fair, we've lost a lot of that. So we have amazing initiatives for kids' education, maybe until the university grade, maybe until bachelor's. But when it comes to the university, we are really far behind many of the neighboring countries, even in some cases. So the technical education in both Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia is far stronger than that in Armenia. So currently, we're in a very beneficial position in the sense that a big number of those exceptionally talented kids with already amazing education is moving to Armenia. And just like Rafi, we try to help them in terms of relocating them to local universities, taking entire groups of people, not just students, but also professors who might bring their postdoc and PhD students, and just giving them the opportunity to continue their research here. But also, if we multiply the number of interesting, truly unique companies that invest into research, not just, let's say, product market fit, I'm pretty sure many of those people will be interested in, let's say, leaving those jobs that they have even in the American companies working remotely and start working for Armenian companies here. So that's the positive note that I would love to leave you with. And just on a personal side, I've already hired some people from this batch. They are truly amazing, and they already help Armenia. So I'll be happy to answer any questions in regards to deep tech or anything else related to CIS.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ashot, for a very cogent, direct, and clear example. And, as we're proceeding with our discussion here, so Rafi, could you elaborate a bit more in terms of the implications here of these type of ventures, and specifically with a global context? Now, I was just in the Philippines, and the Philippines, upon arrival said, yeah, we are a small country. The Philippines,
200 million people or whatever it is, right? 110 million.
And we can report there these types of examples in some ways were the envy of such large countries. So, these sort of advanced product companies working in increasingly advanced capabilities, if you could give us some context here, Rafi, in terms of what it means that we have founders such as Ashot attempting such ambitious things.
Well, I think we can't have this discussion if we don't talk about the power of the diaspora, right? And what I mean by that is that both, for example, ServiceTitan is a great example, right, of two diasporan Armenians founded a company solely focused on the North American market, grew the company there, eventually came and started a significant operation here. And by the way, they're moving a bunch of the folks from their Russian office plus their families to Armenia. In fact, they've already moved that, if I'm not mistaken. So one is sort of the kind of people that are in the traditional diaspora that kind of think of Armenia as part of their growth plan or as part of their investment plan. The other one are, another great example is Ashot's personal experience, right? Sort of, Moscow, St. Petersburg, went to some of the best schools there, has that background, has that network, and then, ultimately comes and, establishes, or I should say, kind of anchors a company here and is growing it from here. The crispest example is great. David was working in Silicon Valley. They did Berkeley Skydeck. So it was kind of a, what I would call a brain circulation, right? Born and raised in Armenia, went abroad, learned some things, came back, and is now again, sort of purely anchored in Armenia. So I think that part of the reason we can, as the term I used earlier is that we can box above our weight and we can, have companies or countries such as the Philippines be somewhat jealous of us is because we've got this sort of global network that we are using, probably not to, full potential, but at least enough to give us, more opportunity. When we were doing Digitech Summit last year, so it's the first time. Digitech is typically the IT expo that takes place, trade show, if you like, every year, mostly Armenian companies or foreign branches or Armenian branches of foreign companies. This year we did Digitech Summit, or last year we did Digitech Summit for the first time. And we were able to attract, for example, non-Armenian tech journalists to be moderators of the panels, just because when you talk about the companies that were going to participate at the CEO or founder level, these are names that they've heard of, right? So they probably never heard of Armenia, but they heard of some of these companies. And I think that's giving us, like a joker card to play with that we need to make better use of. Now, as I think both Ashot and I mentioned, that can only take us so far, right? At some point, in order to scale further, you need to have all aspects of the ecosystem working well together. So that's why I think some of the work that ARPA's doing, some of the investment that's gone, not just into AUA, but the other universities, expanding programs, that's all great. Even the government of Armenia has gotten into the act with a lot of pressure from the private sector to increase the funding for basic research through the various academies of sciences. So there are sort of baby steps in the right direction, but what we probably need is a combination of, Unum being the next, not just unicorn by 10x unicorn or 50x unicorn, and 5 more companies like that, because that'll allow us not just to, just capital to be able to invest back into our ecosystem, but also create more success stories that others want to follow. I mean, I think, this summer, ServiceTitan is preparing for an IPO, right? So when they IPO, a bunch of their employees in Armenia are going to become millionaires, right? So, and that's something that hasn't happened in Armenia before. So whereas before you'd have like the epitome of success for a young Armenian kid would be, oh, I want to be like those, like those gangsters in the soap operas that they, their parents watch on TV, where everybody's driving big Jeeps and, they're throwing money around, right? Now we're seeing this new type of hero or successful person, and that will impact the next generation, and they'll want to strive for more, and they'll want to go to the RMATs, they'll want to go to the TUMOs, they'll want to push to get decent master's or PhD programs. And even if they don't, even if they end up going abroad, like doing their bachelor's here, getting a master's or PhD abroad, many of them will look to come back because they see that this ecosystem is working. So I think we have to make the best of what we have. But generally speaking, I think we're going in the right direction. If I answer your question, Armin.
Yeah, thank you, Rafi. And as a follow-on here, and folks, by all means, as we are having in the last portion of our time here together, fire across any questions you have in the chat. We'll weave it into the dialogue as we've been doing. So Rafi, in terms of this point you've made, our strongest founders have had personal experience in multiple cities. Albert Stepanyan in South America, Vahe Andonians in Germany of Cognaze and Skyla respectively, Service Titan, Picsart, Crisp. I mean, it's a block is emerging here. What would you say in terms of this idea of our past Julfa network? So in terms of the old merchant network, it seems like we're having something analogous today, with some colleagues here. I see Emma Arakelia on the line, is that the trade is not, silk or calico printing. What's happening is capital is being mobilized to founders that are building enterprises that can strengthen a nation. Mm-hmm. So we'd be curious here, picking up some of the chatter we have in the chat. What would you say in terms of the alliance building, the global network and implications around this?
Well, I mean, I think I was kind of, hinting at that, but I think you articulated, or you sort of presented a more articulate way that the network that we have of Armenians around the world that have achieved different levels of success in different areas is something that is a very strong asset that we need to leverage further. The other thing I would say is that COVID tremendously helped our case. It helped our case because, if you were an entrepreneur and wanted to go to the top 15 or 20 venture capital firms in the US, you literally would have to sort of, get your deck together and start, hope to get enough appointments on Sand Hill Road or the 128 Loop or whatever in the US to do that. COVID meant that you could do pitches via Zoom or via other platforms. It meant that it was okay to work remotely. It meant that if you are a Fortune 100 or Fortune 500 company, it's okay to buy from a technology provider that doesn't have an office in where your company's headquartered, right? So I think all of those things make it a lot easier for Ashot's team is sitting in Yerevan, right? But the blog and the way it's written and the way it's presented could be written anywhere in the world, and nobody's geolocating Ashot to find out where he is. Right, and I think that's a huge asset that we have to use, and also, alongside that, when we first moved to Armenia in 2008, people were like, "You're crazy! What are you doing? You're leaving the U.S. behind." Blah blah blah. And there was this sort of, I don't know if the right word is stigma, but certainly a lot of kind of, skepticism about, why would anybody want to move to Armenia, right? Now. First of all, you don't have to move to Armenia to be part of the Armenian tech success story, right? You could be anywhere in the world. And if you look at companies like Picsart or SoloLearn or Sila, I mean, they now have employees all over the world, right? And it's you're no longer bound. I mean, in the old Silk Route, right? You had to be on the Silk Route to benefit from that trade, right? Now it's really more about a globally distributed network, and it's more about how you present yourself and how strong your ideas are, how strong your technology is, how strong your vision is, how strong your execution is, than really where you are in the world.
Thank you so much, Rafi. Ashot, we'll pass the ball to you, so to speak. We have, as Rafi's been highlighting, this network. It can be immobilized around founders. And so if we take Unum, for example, how will this strengthen Armenia? How will you as a founder, how will Unum as a company? Will Unum be the largest taxpayer in the country and this be a point of pride? Will Unum, in terms of its technological prowess allow us to have stronger relations, not only corporation to corporation, but country to country? You know, how will these startups make a difference for the country in terms of various socioeconomic classes? What would you say?
I think this will make a lot of difference. So for you to actually be that significant, you have to provide something to the world that they cannot get anywhere else. So why would an American company, or let's say an intelligence agency or a government, I'm not saying an American specifically, but any government, decide to buy software or let's say build up infrastructure on top of the services that they buy from an Armenian company? Most agencies or most governments would never do it unless there's a very significant reason that they would get something, let's say 2 times more cost efficient, or let's say 5 times more scalable than what they can find or source internally. So for us, being able to build something like this internally and then give it to the world will actually change the way we speak to the others and communicate with the others significantly. To get there, one of the important parts is actually like first having important seed research around which you can grow those the teams. But then in the process, while we'll be building it, the good part is that we are happy to invite more people from abroad. We are happy if those people come, and the brightest talents from all over the planet work with us in Armenia, not just Armenians specifically. So the talent is kind of distributed more or less uniformly around the planet. So they're exceptionally talented Chinese people, exceptionally talented Americans, exceptionally talented Russians and Africans. But what I'm seeing is that when you start working on the things that essentially no one else invests into, and you find them scientifically and fundamentally fulfilling and important, people from everywhere decide to come. So if your question is like how I see Unum playing out in this whole picture, yes, definitely I want to be the biggest taxpayer in Armenia. I want to help make Armenia the international scientific hub like the history has never seen before. And hopefully computing is one of the best places to start to do so, because the computing research is very easy to export. We just need to send the packet over the internet and just run it on the cloud anywhere else on the planet. We're easily deployable on AWS in North Carolina. We can equally easily run on the Huawei cloud in China, in Beijing, or anywhere else. It's that easy. So yes, we need to use our network, but then in the process, we'll also be able to bring the bright talents, organize them around our research, build cool universities and the most advanced research labs in all of computing, not just AI, not just digital circuits, but also quantum, optics, whatever it takes.
Armin, I saw a question about the sort of how does the success in tech trickle down to address the poverty level in the country? So if you don't mind, I can sort of try to address that now.
Go for it, Raf.
So, you know, obviously not everyone in Armenia is going to work in tech, right? And that's true for any country, including Armenia. So I think the number is somewhere around 15 to 20,000 that are working in the technology industry. But it's already trickling down is that in the fact that the average salary for somebody working in tech is, you know, I don't know the exact number, but it's got to be at least 4, if not, you know, sort of 8 to 9 times more than the sort of national average salary, right? So people are getting paid better, which means that they can spend more on things like private kindergartens or going to restaurants, or sort of, you know, even if both people both parents are working, to have somebody, you know, watch the kids, or, you know, clean the house, or whatever that might be. So there's sort of more income being generated that gets spent, not just within the IT industry. Secondly, it used to be that when you were in the outsourcing world, everybody, 90% of the people in the company had to be programmers, right? And that obviously requires a certain level of, you know, knowledge and aptitude in math and logic, English language. So it kind of, you know, it automatically excludes large parts of the population. Now, as we move from outsourcing into more productized or sort of services that are delivered, you need not only programmers, but obviously you need quality assurance people. You need people that are working in customer support, in marketing, in sales, in these other areas that don't require as much of a deep technical education as if you're going to be a programmer. I give you a couple of examples. So I got into a GG taxi one day, and the driver recognized me from some interviews I'd done, on local TV. And he said, "Oh, you're in industry, you're in tech. I'm looking to get into tech. What should I do?" So I told him, there are these different programs that you can go to learn things like QA. And for QA, for certain parts of QA, you don't need to have a strong sort of math background. It's really more about being meticulous and being structured in your work and things like that. And now he calls me every 2 months saying, "Oh, I just went through this course. I've applied to these companies. What do you think about this company?" So, I mean, it's an example of one. But another example was when we bought some land in one of the villages near Yerevan, and our neighbor's daughter-in-law was working as a customer service agent for one of the telecom companies here. And her father-in-law said, "Would you mind talking to her? She wants to know what else she can do." So I told her, go learn QA, and now she's working, making 2 or 2.5 times more the salary working in QA at another company. And again, she's not a programmer. So I think there is an opportunity both from the income that's being generated to be sort of trickled down to other parts of the economy. The other thing is that through programs like RMAT and COAF and TUMO, a lot more kids in villages are getting exposed to technology. And of course, not all sort of 100 kids in a village school in Tavush are all going to end up, working for, Atrud's company or the next unicorn, right? But some of them will, and some of them are getting that access that they wouldn't otherwise get. And because of this distributed model, because people can work, don't have to be sort of in an office in Yerevan, we're seeing already, and we're likely to see more, these people able to stay, where they grew up, generate much more income than anybody else in their family, and that income is going to trickle down to those villages. It's not perfect. We're not going to address the whole, 35%, 40% poverty level in the country just by the growth of tech, but it certainly is contributing to alleviating that problem.
Thank you so much, Rafi. So to Ashot and back to you, Rafi, as related to some of your opening remarks. So does this mean that the block of Armenian startups will mature and effectively be such as the National Science Foundation? So Ashot, a specific point here, will Armenian OCR, optical character recognition, be supported by startups in terms of training and development? And then Rafi will, for the second part of the question, in terms of what it means to support our institutions. But please, Ashot, to you.
When we talk about AI stuff, I guess, just a small intro for everyone to be on the same page. Like, it's relevant on what kind of data you are training your models. So if your, let's say, data set doesn't include Armenian language stuff, your model is not likely to understand Armenian. And the same for handwritten character recognition, the OCR stuff that Armen just mentioned. So like if your neural network has never seen Armenian letters, it's not going to understand those. In the past, AI, when trained, would have been trained very often for one language specifically or for one domain specifically. Today, as I kind of briefly mentioned, AI is kind of de-democratized. We train huge networks that apply to all languages more or less simultaneously. And especially within the natural language processing domain, we are not even speaking about such thing as Armenian AI or Armenian natural language processing. Even the people who do research in Armenia and include Armenian language, they're not doing it specifically for Armenian language. They are doing it for a broader set, just like we do, and include Armenian into the pile. So at this point, the biggest data sets are called like Common Crawl for natural language processing. And I've just opened up as I received your message that currently Common Crawl contains Armenian as 0.03% of the whole data set. So not 3%, but 0.03%. One of the things that we can do to actually improve the ratio is to actually just write more content in Armenian, then it will get indexed by search engines, and we can add it into the data set and stuff. And we're actually doing part of that work in our office here as well. So that's kind of the answer. There's no Armenian AI, there's global AI. We can just add Armenian into the mix.
Thank you very much, Ashot. And I'm loving this levels of abstraction we are transitioning for our panel today. So Rafi, please bring us, to the institution level here. What do you see in terms of what we should be doing as a country, given our size, the interconnectedness of this?
So one thing we're already doing, which I think is pleasantly different than what happens in many other economies with sort of advanced technology industries, are the CEOs of our local companies tend to be much more patriotic than your sort of average CEO in Silicon Valley or in Germany or somewhere else. So a lot of these companies already give, in terms of time, their resources, financing different kinds of activities that help to build the ecosystem. So as an example of the 600 RMAT engineering labs that I mentioned, more than half were opened via private sector funding. I mean, private sector, including NGOs and things like that, but I mean, non-government funding. And a lot of these were companies sort of giving back because they realized that this is step one in a sort of a series of steps to give these kids a chance to contribute to the industry. And then, whenever there's a new project that we need to kick off, I've got a list of 5 to 10 CEOs of companies that I can call that I know I can count on if these are projects that will contribute to sort of to give more opportunity and to the growth of the ecosystem. As I mentioned earlier, there's been the government increased the budget for basic scientific research by, I think, 50% from last year to this year. I might have the number wrong. It might be 20-something%. But in any case, a significant increase. And that was due to very heavy duty lobbying by small companies, but especially some of the larger tech companies whose voices couldn't be ignored. And that led to sort of, the government actually moving the needle on something. There are labs that are funded by private companies at Polytechnic, at Yerevan State, at Slavonic, at AUA, just like you have in the States, right? I mean, if you drive or walk across a campus at Stanford, every big tech company name or every big tech company founder or CEO's name is on one of the buildings. Now, in Armenia, they don't do it at the building level. We've started at the lab level, but it's a place to start. So I think, the people's hearts are in the right place. There is energy and funding and resources going towards this. It's probably not as coordinated as it could be, and it could probably be better matched by the government, not just in terms of government funding, but in terms of their willingness to step up to make the necessary changes to make this ecosystem healthier and better positioned for scaled growth.
Thank you very much, Rafi. A topic I want to return to, and Ashot and Rafi, you alluded to it, around the labor economics. So in an assertion I'll put forward and would welcome your reactions here is that when there's the sentiment of the wages are going out of control, is this really that the wages are just jumping erratically, or is this really a shock to the tech ecosystem that labor arbitrage and outsourcing is no longer sustainable? And there's a key need in terms of increasing the quality of sales, margin for work awarded, as well as demands on each worker. So would appreciate your thoughts on disentangling, what's happening.
So I can jump in, Ashot, if you like, if you want to go.
Yeah,
next.
I would love that. He's throwing questions at me that I cannot even comprehend. So you could do a better job.
So I think he's getting back at you for talking about some things that the rest of us couldn't comprehend. So it's even. So listen, the first part of the wave actually was very positive. It was positive for the following reasons. So if you're an engineer at Synopsys, and let's say you're making $2,000 a month, and you had this burning idea that you wanted to sort of work on, 5 or 10 years ago, you would never leave your cushy job at Synopsys with a guaranteed salary to do that, right? What's happened is that now, not only can you sort of leave the job, risk either personal capital or somebody else's capital in a startup, but you know that if the startup goes kaput in 6 months, you're probably going to get hired at $3,000 or $4,000 a month by somebody else. So in the early part of that, it actually made potential startup founders more risk tolerant and opened up this, what we've seen over the last 5 years. But now we're getting to a point where when your local wages start to equal the wages of any EU country, so Greece, Portugal, even, and then not to mention some of the Eastern, like Romania or some of those countries, that has an impact not just on pure outsourcing, but also offshoring, because some of the bigger companies, like TeamViewer, the company that whose office I was running in Armenia, they said, look, we've got the choice of paying, X in Armenia, but it's not an EU country. We have issues with GDPR, which is the data protection thing that all EU member states are, adhere to. We've got some other issues around, time zone difference, difficulty of travel, visas, whatever that might be. And if I can get the same sort of output for somebody in Greece at 1.2x or 1.15x, at some point the economics do not work in Armenia's favor. So Armin, you're absolutely right. I think this bubble has not only makes it difficult for companies that are within Armenia that are competing for the same resource base, but it could actually kind of chip away at the safety net, which are these large established companies that hire several hundred people, that are a good place for people coming out of university to train and learn and then move on to other companies. So I'm hoping that a couple of things will happen. One is that this, we don't know how many of the influx of Russians and Belarusians and Ukrainians are going to end up staying here. It's probably going to be on the order of 10 to 15% probably in the long term. So that'll be, that'll bring some kind of, pressure release to the system. The other thing is that I've really encouraged companies to get to non-salary based compensation. So things like stock options, things like other ways of being able to retain employees, and not so that what happens is that as opposed to everybody having salary bumps and making the economics not work as much, if you're giving more options to your most talented employees, the ones you really want to keep, they're able to, they win out in the long run, the company wins out in the long run, and you're not contributing to the salary bubble. I think we're in a fairly dangerous place, but I'm hoping that this influx of additional resources and sort of coming up with these different compensation models will help to alleviate that.
Fantastic, Rafi. Ashar, anything to top up on this point before we transition to something? No, good. It's good teamwork there. So I want to reach two topics. One is across diversity of industry, and then one is diversity of workforce. So if anyone else has any questions or comments, get it into the chat here. And then we'll have some closing remarks from our ARPA board member, I believe. Hagop, will look to you to help cap us off there. So this first point in terms of diversity of workforce, whether we consider Silicon Valley, Silicon Alley in New York, Armenia we call Silicon Mountains, in the UAE it's Silicon Oasis, in Manila in the Philippines recently learned it's Sinigam Valley. So not after a mountain or water or anything. Sinigam is a soup. So it's very endearing as Armenians here. That's what the tech sector is called. Now, what's clear in all of these other rising tech sectors and established ones, besides Armenia's, is that the workforces are highly diverse. So getting to some of the opening remarks, what should companies do? What should be some inputs in terms of national strategies? So would welcome some responses, gentlemen.
I think Ashok has some experience in this, in trying to sort of recruit some of his old, fellow classmates or colleagues at other places that he's worked?
Yeah,
I'm putting you on the spot, Ashok.
So it's a truly weird week, or I should say month in Armenia. So my parents left Armenia to move and live and grow in Russia, study in Russia. So they never expected or hoped their kids to move back to Armenia. That was weird from the very beginning. But then it just got weirder. So the crazy part is that last week, or let's say 2 weeks ago, I was meeting my fellow classmates from both school and university in Armenia. None of them are Armenian. So in the past, Armenians would move somewhere else to work. Now we are actually hosting the others. And for you to actually get what kind of numbers I'm talking about. So in my department where I studied, we only had 10 people graduating with a degree after, let's say, 4 years of intense, painful work. So out of those 10, 3 are already living in Armenia. And I'm the only one of 10 who's Armenian. So that's how fast the things are changing. In regards to diversity, I wouldn't, so like diversity is a big thing everywhere, like especially in the last few years, but I wouldn't be so focused on that part. So we are very diverse in other ways. Like in Armenia, when we go to meetups or conferences, half of the class is women. It's not the case in the Valley. It's not the case in Russia. It's also very broad in terms of age. So we have people who are, let's say, 10 years old, who are just starting, and like they are not even intended to be studying this stuff. They're just enthusiastic themselves. And then we have people who are 60, 70, of all ages, and they're often from different parts of diaspora. So we already have a lot of diversity, but thanks to this new wave of migration, if we can accommodate the people that are coming, especially the brilliant ones, we'll have extreme diversity of bright ideas. This is the most important part.
Thank you, Ash.
So I would just add a couple of things. Ashok's spot on. I would just add a couple of things. One is that, again, before we had the sort of Ukraine situation, as companies were getting very desperate for resources and we're looking to hire from Iran, from India, from sort of other countries, there was a big, there was a lot of red tape to be able to hire foreign employees. In fact, Armenia has a law that's very similar to the law in the US, where, you know, if you apply for a work permit for somebody from abroad, you have to prove that you can't, you know, sort of source locally, and there's a whole process you go through. So Armenia had its own version of that, very bureaucratic, took very long. So the Ministry of Economy, working with the Ministry of Social Affairs, as well as the sort of the police department, whoever grants the work permits, they work together to simplify that process. So hopefully now, you know, if you're a company, you need to hire resources, can't find them locally, there's a much more accelerated process for you to be able to bring in people from abroad. Now, Armin, the other thing though that's interesting is that, you know, I mentioned the diaspora, right? So we're actually already diverse just within Armenians, right? So if you have, you know, Armenians that have worked in the Emirates where you are now, or worked in Russia, or worked in London, or studied in any of those places, they're already bringing some of that culture, and you're seeing that injected into the companies. And it's a very important part of the sort of the transition and the how can I put this, sort of the maturing process of some of these companies.
Most certainly, Rafi, and thank you, Ashok. Yeah, certainly the differences of Armenians in the UAE. The next stop I'll be making in Houston for the NASA Trish board meeting, then LA, then New York, and then back to Yerevan. So certainly looking forward to connecting more with the ARPA team. One last question here, Ashok and Rafi. Necessarily, we've been having a tech-focused discussion here. And indeed, every industry, whether it's agriculture, education, healthcare, will have aspects of tech in its transformation. Is there any bright spots or any key considerations you would call out, whether it's in agriculture or in transportation in another industry, that you'd like to share with the group?
So I think there's potential, certainly, in agriculture, using sort of smart technologies, IoT, things like that, to be able to increase productivity and yield, and reduce things like disease and in farm animals. So I think that's an obvious area. The government had gone down this path of an isotope generator, I think, a few years ago, to try to sort of turn, to create a cluster around cancer treatment in Armenia. That kind of didn't go exactly according to plan, although I've heard that there's sort of a process now to revive that. I think, Armin, in reality, over the next few years, I think the biggest benefit from technology will be to create more opportunity for local Armenians, men and women, boys and girls, to be part of this sort of growth path, and then have it trickle down to other parts of society. And as that develops more, then we'll see that sort of, if we're, if we have several startups that are, as we do, that are doing things, for example, doing AI and drug research, right? You could see some of that kind of going back into local drug research, or at least the local healthcare system. I think, another area though that we definitely are investing in, we need to invest in, is in military technology. So that's something that we're already seeing, and we've seen a lot of conversion of companies that were doing something that could be considered dual use, that are spending more on military technology, so that we become more self-sufficient and be able to meet the exact local needs. And we saw what's happening in Artsakh this week. So the need is real, and that's probably the sector that that requires the most and could benefit the most in the near term.
Yeah, thank you, Rafi. Yeah, in terms of aspects of health, we have two. Getting back into healthcare systems, we have two robotics companies, Robin the Robot and Moxie by Embodied, made it the cover of Time magazine. So it's tech going into healthcare, and certainly security is foundational. Ashot, any final brief closing comment on this point here?
I would agree on the part that the military and dual use technologies can benefit. I agree that tech is by far the biggest beneficiary and the most promising space. I have at least a hinge of hope that the healthcare system, in a broader sense than you guys meant, can actually grow with us. So people already travel to Armenia for some specific kinds of surgeries, more often for plastic surgeries, mostly facial and nose, and mostly from northern neighboring countries, or not so neighboring. I think it would have been great if we could actually scale this thing. Like, just growing up in Russia, I know how often Armenian surgeons and doctors are considered like top-notch in that country. It would have been great to see more of them actually moving here and continuing their practice, maybe as public practice or private practice here. Unfortunately, I'm a bit too far from this sector to be able to tell anything meaningful. I'm just an observant.
Thank you, Ashot. Indeed, medical tourism, looking forward to increasing content from future ARPA series. So with that, my name is Armin Kurlopian. Thank you, Ashot. Thank you, Rafi, for joining us today. Would love to hand the floor back to you, Hagop, and Armin, a warm welcome. Please, you have the floor back.
Thank you very much, Armin, and also Ashot and Rafi. Excellent discussion. Now, as an example of what is happening in the digital world in the healthcare system, we have one of our board members, Dr. Armine Lulegian, who is heading actually an activity in that area in Armenia, and she's the director of programs at USC. So, Armine, would you please kindly say a few words about what you're doing in digitizing the healthcare system in Armenia?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for allowing me to comment on this. So yes, we are doing actually lots of work in healthcare. And last time I was there, actually Rafi and I met. And so this is a very, very exciting space. Like, IT has to work with health IT in terms of making digitization of healthcare in Armenia a possibility, and the possibilities are endless. So one of the things that I'm doing with my colleagues at CHLA is launching a health informatics training program in Armenia, and we'll be training 4 fellows, 2 providers, two clinicians, doctors in Armenia, and 2 PhDs with the computer science and tech background. And they're going to be, participating in a bootcamp course that we've modeled as very similar to the American Medical Informatics Association 10 by 10 course. They will be also attending specialized training based on the projects they're working on, and then they have to be completing independent and directed projects, research projects in health IT using electronic health records in Armenia. And all of our 4 fellows are embedded in, one of them is in a tech company at Armed, which is like basically the provider, the primary electronic health record vendor in Armenia, as well as several hospitals and the Ministry of Health. So it is a nascent field, but it is there's a lot of excitement surrounding this, and it is happening. So we have to collaborate with IT because we need you. And the talent in Armenia has been insanely, surprising in all the good ways for me. I will be in Armenia April 14 to the 22nd, launching the program. So, so if you are going to be there, I would, just let me know.
Thank you very much, Armenia. And also, Dr. Georgi Chaltikyan is working with the government, and they're trying to establish a digitized system of healthcare in Armenia. So I don't know if Dr. Chaltikyan wishes to say a couple of words in this regard.
I'd love to. Unfortunately, I can't turn my video on.
That's okay. Just a couple of words, yes.
If Jora could allow me, okay. Now it's possible. Yes, thank you very much, Jakobjan, and thank you, Armen, Rafi, Ashot, for a wonderful panel. And hi, Armine. And great to see you, and great to see all the colleagues. And I think I have presented earlier the Digital Health Initiative, the Armenian Digital Health Initiative that we have been working on since 2019. And the goals of the initiative are quite ambitious. The underlying idea is basically that we think that Armenia has an opportunity to excel in digital health. And we think that digital health, specifically that area of digitalization of economy, is an opportunity, and could be and should be an opportunity for Armenia and Armenians, and not just an opportunity with regards to healthcare, but we are talking here about digital health becoming a driver of growth for Armenian economy and for Armenians as a global networked nation. So basically the idea, the underlying idea and the ambition of the initiative is quite significant. And in the past year or so, we have been advocating and building momentum and talking with various governmental officials with regard to this initiative. We think that there is an understanding at the level of the government that this could be a potential for Armenia, to potential of growth, potential to create, to make a difference, basically. And as of right now, we are working on a feasibility study and on presenting a detailed action plan or a roadmap of establishing the digital health cluster in Armenia. And that study is expected to be ready by May or June, the latest this year. So this is going to be a robust document that is going to be basically presented to the government and, as we say, put on the table of the government. And we do hope that after that, we should be able to establish a center, basically a digital health council and a digital health center in Armenia in order to drive further developments. We welcome, of course, yes, everybody's efforts and everybody's support in that regard. And we welcome the similar initiatives by our colleagues, including Armenia's training course. I would like to mention that it's not just that, we are also launching a master's program in digital health. I guess I mentioned that earlier. It will be hosted by the Slavonic University in Armenia jointly with our master's digital health that I'm heading here in Germany. So a lot of developments hopefully are coming up soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jakob.
Thank you. Yes, a lot is going on, I think, in the digital world. There's also now the Bioinformatics Institute, which is also a digital activity, I believe. And so, yes, there is a good future in that area in Armenia. And thank you again for everybody's participation and joining us. We will have a panel discussion on the Armenians in the Middle East and future trends next April 30th is the target right now. I'm not sure if this is the final date yet, but we're working on that. And also we will have a similar panel discussion in May, which will be related to Armenians in Turkey and also what has changed since the First World War. So thank you very much. And we are also happy to report that we have now working with the government of Armenia on establishing science fairs in schools of Armenia. And today, actually, they had the second science Olympiad, or science Kidagan Paradon in Armenia, in the Yerevan State University. And the winners of that science fair will be participating in the International Science and Engineering Fair, which is held every year in the US for the second year this year. So thank you very much and hope to see you next time. Thank you again, Armen, Arshod, Rafi, Armine, and Georgie.
Thank you, Hago.
And thank you, Jora.
For having us.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.